Okay, so in this episode we're going to be making the GUI system. So let's start off by creating a new package called GUI. And in this package, let's create a GUI component. Just like that. And this is going to be an abstract class, much like the component class, right? Now this is going to have a couple of attributes, including the name, boolean that determines if the cursor, the mouse, the cursor is hovering over the component. So like if it's a button, if the cursor is hovering over the button, we need to know if it is, right? And then protect in case we like click the button. And then we'll have a vector to I, so a vector but in integers for the position and for the scale. And we're going to have a rectangle called bounds. And then let's have a constructor that passes in the name and the position and the scale. Let's initialize everything. Including the bounds, which is going to be equal to a new rectangle. So the reason why we use the AWT rectangle object is because it has a method built into it called intersects, which is very useful. It's literally like you have a point and you pass that point through the intersects function, and if the point is inside of the box, it'll return true automatically for you. It's really easy to use, which is why I love it. And then pass in the attributes. There we go. And now we are also going to want a abstract update method and an abstract render method. Not update. There we go. And then we're going to want a public abstract void on click. So if we ever click on the components, it'll call this method. All right, so now let's create something called an interface. It's going to be a click listener. And it'll be clear why we need this in a second. Let's do void on click. It's going to be the only thing in here. And basically what this allows us to do is like specify, like when we're creating, you'll see later. So now let's create a GUI text class. Now this isn't actually going to extend a component. It's going to be a static class. Alright, so those are the parameters. You want to pass in the graphics, the text, the position, the center, whether the text is being centered in the position specified, and the color and the font. So we'll first set the color to the color in the parameters, set the font to the font in the parameters, create the X, and if it is centered, then we will count for that. So we'll do font metrics, fm equals to g.get font metrics, font right there, x equals to x minus fm.string width text divided by 2. Same thing with the y. This time it's going to be y equals to, in parentheses, y minus fm.get height divided by 2. Plus fm.get ascent, and then we're going to draw the string. Okay, so done that. Now let's create a GUI layer. Alright, so the GUI layer is like the layer at which all of our components, all of our buttons, all of our text, it will sit on the layer. So we'll do private final list of GUI components. Import that. Remember that instance stuff we did with the window? Well, we're going to do it again. Let's have a constructor that is private, so we cannot create more than one instance of it. And let's create that get instance. Public static GUI layer get instance. Just call it get. We'll say if the instance is equal to null, we'll create a new instance, and then we will return that instance. Otherwise, it's just going to return the instance if it's already been created. Now let's create a method called onMouseMove. So this method will be run every single time our mouse moves to check whether our cursor is on top of something important. Import. Just call this mouse position, and then vector2i, mouse moved, and vector2i, mouse dragged, and now we're going to want to create a couple of getters. I'll just call it public void clear. This is going to clear any buttons or text on the GUI in case we want to reset anything. We can do. Sorry, let's rename this to GUI components. Say GUI components dot clear. And we'll do public void add GUI component. Okay, so add GUI component, and in the parameters we'll do GUI components c. Say this dot GUI components dot add c. We'll have a remove, or we will do the same thing, but we will remove it instead. We'll have a list that will, or a getter for the GUI components, just a getter, simple getter. Okay, now we can continue. On the mouse move method, we can do for each GUI components c in get GUI components. So we'll iterate through each index in the GUI components, or we'll iterate through each component inside of the GUI components. And we'll set hovering to c.bounds.contains mouse position.x, mouse position.y. Remember what I said about rectangles, rectangle objects, making it really easy to detect whether your cursor or something else is intersecting another rectangle. And then we'll do c.update. We'll do public void on mouse release. X mouse int y mouse, and this can actually be a vector2i mouse position, and in here we'll try and catch a concurrent modification, but we'll just ignore any error that we get because who cares? It's all iterating so quickly that it doesn't really matter. Alright, let's do a for loop. And we'll do if c.hovering c.onClick. Okay, oh, I don't think I ever explained the concurrent modification exception. That just happens when you're iterating through a list and then you change something in the list. It's like, oh wait, what? You changed it and you're looking at it right now? That's weird. So yeah, that's what happens. Okay, so now we're gonna have a public void render method. gotta pass in the graphics component. And in here we'll do same thing, try catch, ignore it once again, and we'll do for each GUI component c and get GUI components. We'll do c.render, pass in g. There we go. And make sure that this takes in g. Okay, so that's the GUI layer all finished. Now let's actually make sure that it's created and everything. So let's start with the get instance. Okay, so it's been like a good hour since I paused the recording, but I think I left off in the Windows scene. In the initialization method, we want to actually create the GUI layer. All right, so the GUI layer is literally just a layer that is on top of the entire game that stores all the buttons. That's where you'll see all the buttons. It's completely separate from the world coordinate system. It's its own coordinate system, its own layer of objects, and it's just a layer on top of the window. So the GUI layer we're gonna make down here. All right, so we made the GUI layer. Now we need to actually initialize it. So first thing we're going to do is go down to the initialization method, and right where we set visible to true, right above that we'll say create GUI layer, and we'll do GUI layer equals to GUI layer dot get. All right. So that should create an instance of the GUI layer, and now we actually have to update it, or render it, I mean. So we'll go down to the render method, right here, and right after the current scene, we're going to do GUI layer.render g, because remember, the GUI layer is a layer on top of everything else, which means that it must be rendered after the current scene. So it should start rendering it when we run the game. And now we have to do some of the mouse stuff, so we need to make sure that everything is being called properly. So let's go to the mouse manager. You can see we have a few notes here, and this mouse moved, we'll say GUI layer.get, and we'll call on mouse move. And in the parameters, let's put in some of the attributes that we promised the function that we would give it to the mouse position, as well as the move x and the move y, and the drag x and drag y. There we go. And now we should go over to mouse released, right here. Mouse released, delete this, and we'll say GUI layer.get and .get. We'll do on mouse release, pass in mouse x and get mouse y. And then we need to do here. Actually, no, I think that's it. All right, so that's all done. And I think, oh, we have an error. 1 second. See, what does it say? I think we have to do a new vector 2i. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So then, that's all done actually. So I believe we can make a GUI text. But actually, before we do that, we need to implement it into the scene, right? The GUI layer. So how's this going to work? Well, we're going to have our own GUI method that's rendered above the render. So we'll just have public void GUI. It's going to render with the graphics component, but not every scene is going to have a GUI layer. So we'll just put that as separate and a non-required, non-abstract. but then in the game scene, we need to do this. When we render it, we want to put a GUI layer. Actually, we want to put that after everything. Okay. Now that that's done, we should also, we should now be able to create text. So let's just test this out in the game scene. We'll do GUI right here. And in the load resources, we'll use this, right? And we'll say GUI text dot draw string parameters. Let's pass in g test string new vector 2i, and then let's center it. Let's set it to a white font color and then set that to the font. And we'll put the position at, I don't know. Let's center it, so we'll do window.get width divided by 2 and window.get height divided by 2. Let's run it. You can see that it says test string right smack dab in the center of our scene, which is perfect because that's what we wanted to happen. And you can see that as we move up, it doesn't move the string because remember, it's a separate layer, separate from the world coordinates, which is exactly what we wanted. All right, so that's that. That's the GUI layer for now. Next, I believe we will be making the main menu along with some buttons.